Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Beth Vivio, class of '88, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this very special Kenyon Women Giving Back virtual event. Tonight, we are partnering with the Kenyon Book Club, and together we are very excited to feature author Rowan Beaird, class of '09, in conversation with Professor Sarah Heidt, class of '97. The discussion will explore Rowan's novel, The Divorcees. Set in 1950s Reno, Nevada, The Divorcees is a compelling work of historical fiction that explores the lives of women seeking independence and new beginnings at a divorce ranch similar to Golden Yarrow, where women were required to establish a 6-week residency in order to file for divorce. Our moderator for this evening is Professor Sarah Heidt. Sarah joined Kenyon's faculty in 2004 and specializes in 19th century British literature and culture, autobiography and life writing, and also women's writing. She is particularly fond of George Eliot, Toni Morrison, Virginia Woolf, Ali Smith, Rebecca Solnit, and this is my favorite, the Oxford English Dictionary. Height is rarely happier than when immersed in a book, taking a yoga class, or sitting in silence. Professor Height has taught the Kenyon Educational Enrichment Program 3-week intensive writing course most summers since 2006 and has served as resident director of the Kenyon Exeter Program, faculty in residence, faculty co-chair of Campus Senate, and the English department chair. So we're lucky she's got the time to be with us tonight. She's been very busy. She won the Junior Trustee Teaching Excellence Award in 2010 and the Faculty Advising Award in 2017. And she was chosen by the senior class to deliver the baccalaureate address in 2010 and 2018. So before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping items. You're all on mute to keep the audio clear for everyone, but we do want to hear from you. So if you go in the chat and message ask question, a member of our team will field those questions for Professor Height. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Rowan and Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. It's so good to see so many faces I know and faces I don't know, people I just met last week at the book club. And it's so great to be here with Rowan. I want to ask you, Rowan, if you would be willing to share with us a little bit about, to kick off, about how, when and how the idea for this novel first arrived, which is also a chance, if you want to talk a little bit about kind of how you got started as a fiction writer and like reach as far back into your biography as you'd like to on that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's so good to be here with you,
Mm.
Sarah, and thank you all so much for joining and for having me. I will say I had my first college stress dream in a decade
Oh.
last night. So I'm very happy to be here, but there's a part of my subconscious that was clearly terrified.
You're going to pass
So
this exam. You're going to do
thank
great.
you.
You're going to graduate all over again. Distinction, like the
Thank you
whole
so
deal.
much.
So.
Oof, the relief is great. Um, so I guess I'll start specifically with where the idea for the divorcees came from, and then we can go back a little bit. But the idea for this book actually came to me in 2018 on my bachelorette weekend in Las Vegas. So I was at a place called the Neon Museum, which for those of you that haven't been, it's basically this graveyard of old Las Vegas neon signs on the outskirts of the city. And we had this really incredible tour guide who was kind of talking about her own roller coaster of a love life. She was on her fourth marriage, and she said at some point, well, everybody knows that you get married in Las Vegas and you get divorced in Reno. And everybody laughed. But I raised my hand and I said, well, yeah, I know that about Las Vegas. I mean, we passed 5 chapels on the way here, but what are you talking about in terms of Reno? And she gave me a very quick history of divorce law in this country, which, for those of you who don't know and those who haven't read the book, in 1931, to help recover from the Great Depression, Nevada made 2 very important decisions. So they legalized gambling, and they also changed their state's divorce residency requirements so that if you were to move there for only 6 weeks, you could separate from your spouse for really whatever reason you wanted, which was really radically different from everywhere else in the country at the time. I always use New York as an example where you could really only separate from your spouse if they committed adultery. You needed proof of that adultery. So as a result, Reno, because it was already this huge tourist destination at the time, much more so than Las Vegas, ended up becoming the divorce capital of the country. And for women, and it was mostly women traveling there at the time, just as you can imagine, men had jobs and it was very difficult for them to leave the home for 6 weeks. Women who came from relatively well-off backgrounds, women who were famous actresses, when they went to Reno, they would go stay in something called a divorce ranch, which was basically sort of a luxury accommodation where they would spend their days swimming in swimming pools and riding horses, and they'd spend their evenings in casinos. And then at the end of those 6 weeks, they'd begin totally new lives. And I think I was immediately intrigued. I mean, there was part of the glamour of that setting that appealed to me. I grew up watching a lot of the, famous films from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. So the idea that like Rita Hayworth traveled to Reno is very intriguing to me. But I think more than anything else, just the idea of a group of women at this real point of crisis and metamorphosis, all being under one roof for 6 weeks, was really captivating and just felt like the perfect setting for a novel. So I got out my notebook and I wrote Divorce Ranch ? Novel ? But at the time, I mean, really what I studied at Kenyon and what I fell in love with was short fiction. And so I was incredibly intimidated by the idea of writing a novel and never thought I would do it. And so it took a while for me to come around to the idea of this being a really long narrative. But every time I sat down, and I mean, maybe a more skilled writer than I could have done it, but every time I sat down and tried to imagine it as a short story, I was like, gosh, this is just, it's too complicated. There's so much you have to explain in terms of the setting and the history. So anyway, that's sort of how it became a novel.
Yeah, I'm interested in I have like 3 questions that I want to ask all at once, which is not a smart or a possible thing. So I'm going to go with the question that I wanted to ask you next, which was about how Lois's character developed as the novel developed. But part of the way I want to tweak that question in light of the way you just described the novel's evolution, or sort of refusal to be something shorter, is whether you always imagined centering the novel on a figure like Lois, or whether she kind of arrived later in your writing process. Like, so maybe take that as a 2-part. Like, was Lois always there, and or some version of a central figure like that? And how did she develop as the novel developed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think when I started to do my research into the history of Reno at that time period, one of the films that I actually remember watching as a kid and that I returned to was a film called The Women, which is from 1939. It's George Cukor, for those who have seen it. And it was pretty revolutionary at the time because there were no men that appeared on screen. There were male characters, but they never actually showed up. So when I was just in the ideation phase, I saw that film and I thought, I'm going to write a novel like that. Like, there's no men that are ever going to appear in this book, which for those of you who've read The Divorces, I utterly failed at that. But that was the that was the original idea for it.
They're pretty minor. Like,
pretty minor. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I knew that it was going to be a book about women. And pretty quickly after that, this idea of, telling the love story of a friendship came to me, and a pretty complicated, at times toxic friendship, in the way that romantic relationships can often be very complicated and toxic. And so pretty quickly, this idea of these 2 women came to me, and I had to think about, why 2 women in this situation would be drawn together like magnets. And I started to conceive of the character of Lois. I saw the book as kind of a coming of age novel in its own way. I think it's very much like Lois's quest for selfhood and finding agency and power. And so because of that, I knew that she had to be a bit undefined at the start. And even though she's in her early 20s, I really thought of her like a teenager, somebody that went directly from her father's house at 18 to her husband's house. So she started to take shape in that way. And honestly, in the early days, I think there was part of me that pulled a bit from my own, autobiography as a teenager, just trying to tap into those feelings. And then she became completely her own person. And I will say something that I think happened through drafts of writing the novel. I think she was a much meeker character in the first couple of drafts. And I think part of that was me trying to really emphasize the difference between these two women. Who would somebody like Lois, sort of person in search of a self, be drawn to? Someone who immediately exerts power and influence. But upon revising, I had to think about, well, why would this character of Greer, the other woman in this relationship, why would she be drawn to Lois? And that sort of started to give Lois more shape, and more anger and more power. So I think that's sort of how she came to be.
Did you ever think about, or even make an attempt at writing the book in first person voice, like as Lois, or even because I know and I'm gonna ask a question about your next book a little later, but I know that it's in, or at least know from the description that it's in multiple perspectives. Like, did you think about having Lois and Greer's perspective, or did it always feel like it mattered to you to have a perspective that was close to Lois but not identical with her, that had some distance? Like, how did you think out the voice to use, and did that shift at all in your process?
Yeah, I have always written in sort of a close third. That's just always where I've been really comfortable. Well, I should say I was uncomfortable in it for a long time, as I was trying to figure out how to even write, but how I've gained sort of confidence and comfort. And I think, what I was mentioning before in terms of being kind of terrified at the prospect of this being a novel, sort of how I tricked myself into writing a full-length manuscript was by treating each separate chapter like it was a short story. And so I would think, okay, this is the short story I am writing now. This is the arc of that particular short story. These are the characters that I know, and this is where I want them to end up at the end of the story / actually chapter. And so throughout that process, there were a few moments where I did think, like, okay, what if I write a short story from this other character's perspective? Like, what if we see something different? But in particular with Greer, and what I knew that I needed her as a character to conceal from Lois. I explored that, and I thought I actually did some helpful writing exercises because I think it helped me get to know Greer better. But then when I was actually working on the novel, I realized that I had to keep that out of it and really stay close to Lois. So yes, it was something I definitely thought about. And also the tense of the book, that's something.
That was the next thing I was going to ask about.
Really?
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, did you always mean it to be in present tense, or did you switch to that at some point? And I wanted to know, like, what does writing in present tense offer you? I'm teaching a life writing class right now, and so my students are drafting their final projects, and watching them kind of figure out, like, do I want to tell this memory in present tense or past tense? And like, they'll come in and ask, like, are these verbs right now? Like, is this, like, if I want to say this, then do I need to shift this also? And like, so I'm interested in how that worked out for you as you were writing.
Definitely. I had initially written it in past tense. I think I got about halfway through the manuscript in past tense. And I think I never thought I'd write historical fiction. I love history. I mean, I think I was maybe one credit away from having a history minor at Kenyon, but it was not something that I, as a writer, had ever thought I was going to explore. And then this idea for the divorcees came to me, and I thought, well, I guess we're going back to 1951, which my mother, who was born that year, finds it very offensive that this is categorized as historical fiction, but technically it is. I changed it halfway through because, one, as I was exploring these women's lives and these sort of emotions and thoughts and experiences that they were going through, the more that they began to mirror the fears and desires of women today. And I think that there was a part of me that wanted people to immediately feel that, and that sense of immediacy and urgency to these women's stories, even though sometimes we treat the 1950s like the distant past. So I think there was a, that as a guiding force, and I think also at the same time, I mentioned this conception of the book as a coming of age story, and I think when I was tapping into those feelings of what it was like for me to be a teenager, everything existed in the present moment for me as a teenager. It was very difficult for me to look too far into the future or to look too far into the past. I mean, you know, I myself right now, I'm 39. Like I could not conceive of being a 39-year-old when I was 17. I was like, that's near death. Like, who knows if I'll even make it to that age. So I think that giving it that present tense allowed me to access those emotions and those sensory experiences of what it was like to be a teenage girl, which again, even though Lois is in her early 20s, I thought was really important for the reader to understand how she moves about that world and that intense self-consciousness, and those intense, again, fears and desires. So it was sort of twofold, the reasoning behind it.
Yeah, that all makes so much sense. And I'm this is not something to please your mother, but I'll throw myself under the bus as also historical in a little bit. But before we get to because I want to ask a question about the second book and historical fiction, and since that book is set in the 70s, like I turned 50 last week, so I like like that's also like that feeling of like, how did this happen? And like, look, it's so great that this happened. I made it this far. But it's funny when that like that will be older turns into, wow, I'm still here. So
yes, I'm still alive.
right,
Yeah.
right. I'm interested in, and this is a big, broad question that you are welcome to play with in whatever way you want. I'm interested in whether anything surprised you while you were writing this novel, and if the novel developed in any ways that you didn't expect it to, that you remember, or that this could also turn into a, like, do you have a favorite memory from your process of writing that you want to bring out? Feel free to answer all three parts of that if you want.
No, I love that. I touched on it a little bit, but I think something that I did as part of the research for this book was, not just reading about Reno during that time period, or, America so soon after the end of the Second World War, and sort of going to those history books. But I really tried to immerse myself in the culture of that time period. So that meant, I mentioned watching the women. That meant watching a lot of the seminal films from that time period, films that Lois would have watched and that would informed her idea of kind of what it meant to be a woman at that time. I listened to a lot of the music from that time period, read novels that were popular, and I also looked at a lot of fine art from that time period. So in particular, the art of the like female abstract expressionists, like Helen Frankenthaler. And I think that it made me realize that I had a very sanitized idea of what the 1950s was, and a very flat picture of what that time period was, very much informed by Leave It to Beaver and a lot of the almost advertising images more than anything else. So I think it was really eye-opening, and it's funny that I have to learn this lesson again and again, especially as somebody that, deeply loves reading about history. But I do find myself learning again and again the fact that for all of these different periods and decades of human history, people were just people, and they were just as complicated and messy, and they had just as rich, fascinating lives. And to try to boil it down to, a picture of a woman in a swing dress and an apron is a fallacy.
So that's totally fascinating to me, partly because I've been trying to think of ways to ask questions about the end of the book, which I loved the sense of possibility, and the sense of like when I teach George Eliot's Middlemarch, one of the jokes that I make that's not at all a joke is that so many things would have been simpler for the characters in that novel had they been able to go to college, the women especially, had they been able to go to college, or had they been able to go on dates, right? And like other things would have been messier and more complicated, but like those, so there are things that just the possibility of like being able to leave your family's house and go figure out your life for a few years, like we can do at Kenyon, right? Which Lois could not have done even if her father had been willing to support it, right? Like that, those feel those create different kinds of possibilities, and which is obvious and like trite to say, but also bears remembering because it hasn't been that long, right?
Yes.
And so thinking about the way that Lois in the final few chapters of the book gets this chance to kind of start again in a way that I think is a wonderful turn and a nice
Mm.
mirror of the beginning of the book without spoiling the end of the book for everybody is one of the things I've been
Yeah.
working on. But I don't think it'll spoil things if I say that one of the last places we see, in fact, the last place we see a major character who is not the person I would have expected to see in exactly this way, that somehow, like now, the way you're describing the idea of the sanitized kind of housewifely version of the 50s comes into focus for me differently. Is there's a
Yeah.
character who should not be in a sort of housewifely position in an ad. Is that part of why she's in an ad? In an ad for a, a house appliance, a kitchen appliance. I don't know.
Very much so.
Am I doing an okay job
I
of
know.
guarding against
I
like
know.
the
I'm
not
it's so
spoiling? Okay.
it's so hard. It's
Okay.
so hard. But yes,
Okay.
that it was very much an intentional
Okay.
choice.
Okay.
And I think that something that I gosh, is this going to spoil anything? Something that something that I very much um try to explore throughout the book is sort of clothing as costume, and something
hmm
that I think that
Yeah.
if you've just started the book, and just met some of these characters, I don't think
Yeah.
it's a spoiler to say that when the character of Greer first appears, part of her power is the fact that she always dresses in a masculine fashion,
Yeah.
and that's part of the mystery and the allure of her. And so I think something that I try to communicate through the characters' clothing is how they are desperately trying to both find themselves, but also trying to grasp any shred of power they can in a world that's you know not trying to give women any power or agency.
Yeah. I mean, for people who on the call who haven't read the book yet, first of all, you should. It's really great. And also, like, one of the things that's fun is watching. We start with a moment that's 6 weeks before or 6 weeks after the first chapter. So you get this glimpse of a kind of a moment that is this very particular and very important amount of time in the future. And then you drop back to find out how you got there. And so there's a great moment where you rejoin what you knew on those first couple pages. And one of the things about those first couple pages is that Lois is she has her blue jeans, and then you find out when she arrives at the divorce ranch that she doesn't own any blue jeans, and everyone else is wearing blue jeans. So like her getting her jeans and getting the Reno uniform is an important part of the book, and so also being dressed by someone else, like having clothes picked out for her by someone else, is an important part of the book, and so. So when you read the book, then you can remember this idea of clothing as costume, and that will maybe make a particular TV advertisement that comes really like 4 pages before the end of the book even more important, because it's like the costume there is I had been thinking about the difference in media, and we'll be thinking about this a little bit later, like of sort of we've seen so much about film, and now here we're down to a domestic small screen.
Yes.
And to see this particular character like shrunken down to the small screen and kind of made more conventionally pretty is fascinating. But the way that that's still like playing with a mask is now more vivid to me than it was before
Oh,
we started talking.
good.
So this is fascinating. Um, I'm I have a general question I'm going to skip because I want to stay on like the question of your writing and sort of how you are developing as a writer. This is maybe a version of the Lois question, which is not saying you are Lois or Lois is autobiographical, but sort of I'm interested in what your aspirations are for your writing going forward. Like, what are the things that
Mm,
you're feeling hopeful and excited about? Both as you're about to
yeah.
publish this second book, which I'll say more about in a moment, but also just as you think about subsequent projects.
It's funny. I mentioned before that I was terrified by the prospect of writing a
Mhm.
novel. And to be honest, when I finished The Divorcees, there was a part of me that was like, okay, I know I can do it. Like I can get to the end. um, and I started my new novel, Tenderness, with such confidence because I thought, I've
Mhm.
done this before.
Mhm.
I know how this
How
works.
hard could it be?
How hard could it be? And of course, each new creative project that I undertake is an entirely different challenge. And I found that I will never have the confidence beginning a new project. But so I think that's the negative take on that. I think the positive take on that is what an incredible challenge. And I think with tenderness, the divorcee has taught me so much about writing. And it's funny to think the amount of analysis that I did, particularly at Kenyon, of literature. And then how, when I was actually sitting down and writing it, I had a moment of like, oh my God, what even is a book? Like, how do you, and so, but
what is a person for that matter?
Exactly. Who am I? But I think the longer that I experiment and create within this art form, the more that I'm able to take the sort of lessons that I learned at Kenyon and actually apply it to my own fiction. And so I think when I think about what I'm hopeful about, so I have my book Tenderness coming out this summer, which again taught me so many different lessons. And now I'm working on my third novel. Tenderness is multiple perspectives. My new novel is multiple perspectives and also covers an incredibly long period of time, at least compared to my other two novels of about 25 years. So I think, the comfort that I sought, I'm not seeking it anymore. Like I want to continue to do something completely different every time. And that's incredibly exciting to me and tells me I'm never going to get bored.
Nice. I mean, you've answered a part of this, but I want to come back to it because I was interested thinking about the first book set in the 50s, the second book also historical, right, set in the 70s. 50 years ago now. And I'm interested in, and you're saying that you basically almost did a history, you said you almost did a history minor, right? Like, not almost a history major. You did a lot of history.
Correct. Okay. A lot of history. Yeah.
Okay. And so that gives me one answer toward, why you might be drawn to writing historical fiction. And then also thinking about the, sort of finding the humanity or the common threads of humanity, from era to era feels like it's another part of, a possible part of an answer. I'm wondering if you have, if this might be a question about the third book, actually. If you're still feeling drawn to sort of to writing historical fiction, if it gives you a different foothold for thinking about the present day, or if there's something else that pulls you toward writing about the past as opposed to writing about the present day.
Yeah, it's funny that for somebody who said that she had never had any aspirations to write historical fiction. Now, this third book that I'm working on takes place from roughly the 80s through the early 2000s. So, God, I guess, is that historical fiction? Who knows these days?
Yeah. I would say probably yes. Our students this year, our first year students this year, were born in 2007, just for the fun of everyone on this call. So, yep.
Terrifying.
Yeah, we are historical.
So I will say, once I kind of embraced the setting for the divorcees, I found such joy in the research for this book, to the point that I had to cut myself off at some point and be like, okay, now you actually have to write the thing. And so, but during the process of writing it, I was like, oh God, I can't wait to write the next thing and have it be set in present day and not have to, stop writing in Google when sunscreen was invented. Like I'll just know this world and I'll be comfortable in it and I'll just be able to focus on the characters. And then the idea for Tenderness came to me, and I knew that it had to be set in the 1970s. And it made me think about everything that I learned from writing The Divorcees. And it's exactly what you say. I mean, I think exploring these different decades in time is an opportunity to think really deeply about how those periods have informed 2026 in America. And I think, with the 1970s and Tenderness, like in many ways, I think that the 1970s is when this country became the country that it is today. And so to have the opportunity through my fiction to explore that was really incredible. And I think selfishly, so I hope that my readers get something out of that. But I do think that selfishly, it just gives me the opportunity to dive really deep into these times and these places and just learn for my own benefit. So I find something really exciting about capturing these different time periods. That's not to say that I someday I won't write a novel that has cell phones, but for now, this is my area of interest.
Amazing. I Since we're talking about tenderness, I want to say, first of all, because I've brought up your novel several times and have not yet said, Rowan's new novel is coming out July 21st. It is available for pre-order. I placed my pre-order last night, so I encourage you all to do the same. But Rowan, I want to say congratulations on the second book coming out so soon. Also, that the third book is in progress. That's very exciting. And I'm wondering what you can tell us about, or what you would like to tell us about the new novel, and what kinds of ideas and questions in it might connect to the divorcees, and are they like ideas and questions that just won't leave you alone? Do they just kind of keep coming back? Or is
Yeah.
it a
Oh
new
my
set of
gosh.
ideas and questions that have come up to come at you?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so tenderness, first of all, thank you so much for pre-ordering.
Yeah, yeah, my
And
pleasure. I'm so
it's
excited.
so appreciate it.
Midsummer.
Um, so Tenderness is set in 1976, and it takes place over the course of a wedding weekend in which the bride has recently gotten out of a cult, a real cult that existed from roughly the late 1950s through early 1980s called Synanon. Um, so the novel is told from the point of view largely of the bride's brother and her best friend. And over the course of the weekend, they're trying to figure out why she joined Synanon and whether or not she's really left. So I think that, as much as we think that we're embarking on a totally different creative project, we as people are always circling the same questions. And I think a question that Tenderness and the Divorcees both explore is just, how do we find ourselves? Like, who are we? Do we change from year to year? The different conceptions of ourselves that other people have, and how that informs our own sense of self. And very much like where we find community and belonging. And what better place to explore that than a cult? So anyway,
or a wedding for that matter.
Or a wedding, or a wedding.
I'm holding back from saying, like, one of the things that comes through in the divorcees sometimes is the possibility that some eras' conceptions of marriage, or maybe all eras' conceptions of marriage, are themselves tantamount to a cult. I don't want to say that because I don't be like, hey, married people, like you're in a cult. Like there's the sort of coming into a marriage versus leaving a marriage, but it also feel like, what is it to sign on to a sort of social contract, whether it's one that's sort of shared by, the better part of your, not the like good part, the greater part of your social order, or one that is, that's a kind of a fragmented breakaway group. Is there
Definitely.
resonance there for you?
Oh, definitely. And I think it's no coincidence that I went from writing about divorce to writing about a wedding. I think that's something that I'm really fascinated by. Um, and I think that something else that Tenderness explores, that I think falls under that umbrella of trying to find community, is just like faith in modern America and what that is. And that's something that I've been really fascinated by as a individual, as an intellectual, in all spheres of my life. So I think I got to really explore that in this book in a way that I didn't quite with the Divorcees.
Okay, that's fascinating. Do you want to say anything about, as a contemporary author, about the importance of pre-orders? Just because this is something that
Oh,
I don't feel as though I knew this until the past few years, and like, wow, it's really important to know this if you like to consume contemporary writing. So,
it's so true. Yes, they're really important. They signal interest to the publisher. They make bookstores more ready to stock the book. So it's incredibly important. I don't say this selfishly for myself, but any writers that you love, I know a lot of us think that it's like, oh, okay, whenever that comes out, I'll get it, which is also great. Support your local bookstores, stop by and pick it up. But pre-orders are really critical.
Yeah. So again, I encourage you, support our fellow alum, and also enjoy a great book. I'm so excited about this one. Since you were thinking about and talking about how the question of how we find ourselves, I want to pull to one of the sort of just a couple of the more general questions, like broad questions I have for you. And they're kind of questions that cluster around the idea of how you found yourself, like as a writer and as a person. And one of them is, who have been your most important influences and teachers? And those might be people, but they might also be books or, people you never met, but whom you know through books and learning.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's such a massive question.
Mm.
I mean, I think to focus, because I could ramble on and on,
Uh,
I think I've been profoundly lucky in that at really critical moments of my life, my high school experience, my college experience, and then, when I was in my early 20s, I just had incredible teachers.
mm,
I was really a lost soul in high school. I skipped a lot of class.
mm,
I felt very out of place.
mm,
And my senior year, I had two teachers who were my writing teachers, and they
mm,
said, "I think you have something. Like,
mm,
I think you need to pursue this." And they are the only reason I got into Kenyon. They
mm,
wrote me such incredible letters of recommendation, and really deeply believed in me.
mm.
And then, when I got to Kenyon, I'm not just saying this because he's on this call, but one of my favorite professors was Sergei Lobanov-Rostovsky, and he made me think so differently and deeply about the short story as a
Mm,
form. And I
mm,
think similarly, just like my high school teachers, was somebody that believed in my voice and
mm,
saw that I had potential.
mm.
And I had some very rigorous workshops at Kenyon in which I just felt like my professors didn't quite understand what I was doing. And of
Uh,
course, there are useful lessons from those workshops as well. But it was so meaningful to have a rigorous workshop in which I felt like everything that, Sergey told me. Am I allowed to call you Sergey now? I feel like I shouldn't do that.
you are.
But
He would also tell you that. He will tell you that. Yeah.
um, every time he would have comments on my short story, I was just like, yes, it
Mm,
was, this is, and criticism, but I'd be like, yes, you're
mhm,
right.
mm,
This is what I'm trying to do. And by
mm,
following this advice, I'll get there.
mhm, mhm,
And similarly, when I was in my 20s, I was really lucky in that one of the first jobs that I got was at Grub Street, which is a creative
uh-huh,
writing nonprofit.
mhm,
And I was able to learn from just some incredible writers simply by working there. So it's always been teachers for me. I mean,
mhm.
they've just changed my life in countless ways and helped me to believe in myself when I really, really didn't think I had anything to say.
Mm. That's fantastic. And definitely like feels like the kind of thing that when I get up in the morning, I'm like, I want to I want to be this person for the
I
students in
know
my
you
life. So
are.
now we're trying like
Yes.
doing our best, but that's I'm interested in whether there are particular books or authors who have been teachers that way for you, whether they're still living or not. Like whether and this is also me like asking like not just what are you reading right now, but like what reading has been important for your writing? Because I'm selfishly always making lists of things that might help with my writing too.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I always struggle with this question because I
Yeah.
want to list so many people.
Uh-huh.
Marilyn Robinson is one of my favorite writers of all time. It, I just feel like her books fell out of the sky. Like I can't actually believe that she's a person. I think they're so incredible. Um, Toni Morrison is similar to me, one of my favorite writers, and for both of them,
Mm-hmm.
before I write every day, I try attempt to write every day. I also have a three and a
Mm-hmm.
half year old, so that doesn't always happen.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
it's a very important part of my practice to just always read a paragraph of a book that I love
yeah.
before I actually start writing. And I find that if you pull any Marilyn Robinson or Toni Morrison book off the shelf and open to a random page, you'll just read a paragraph that
Mm-hmm.
makes you catch your breath.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so those are two. I think for contemporary writers, just thinking about a book that I've loved over the past year, I love Lily King. I know
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
she's incredible.
Yeah.
Um,
I just started reading her last fall and was like, where have you been? Like, where have I been? Yeah. So, for those of you who have not read Lily King yet, she had a book called Heart the Lover that came out last year that was also it's a companion in a way that I don't want to spoil for an earlier book called Writers and Lovers. And those two books are both so splendid. She's written
Oh,
other books.
good.
Those are the two that I've already gotten to, and they're highly, highly recommended.
Yes, those are books that sometimes I'm like a guest bookseller at
Mhm.
one of my local bookstores,
Nice.
which is really fun. I just get to hang
Uh-huh.
out in a bookstore and recommend books to people.
I need to get
Um,
that gig.
yeah, it's unpaid,
I
unfortunately.
know, I know. I mean, I should just
But
hang out and yeah, but
yeah,
help.
yeah.
Yeah.
But Lily King is one I find I return
Mhm.
to again and again just because they're incredible books, but there's also an accessibility to them. Um,
Yeah.
so I never hesitate to recommend her.
Hmm. Hmm.
And again, I could go on and on, but I'll leave
Hmm.
it with those three.
All right. Um, this is we could if people want to drop their reading recommendations in the chat, that's also an
Please,
allowable
yes.
thing. You don't just have to put in questions. You can say, "Here's a book I love. Everyone should be reading it." So, a new Elizabeth Strout coming out next month. That's like she's also like
Amazing.
terrific, and there are so many of those books, so you can just keep
Yes.
going. All right. I wanted to ask, this is a related question. There are a lot of, and I've turned off the full grid, so I'm only seeing the two of us and a few people down the side. But I know from both the attendee list that, the registrant list and also the people who came on the call that we have a number of young alums on this call. But this isn't just a question about young alums. What advice would you give alums and even students, young or old, who are
Mm.
hoping to write or create and maybe are
Oh,
just thinking like, I don't know how to get started or how do I keep going? Do you have advice that you would offer?
yeah. I think the first thing that comes to mind is to always take yourself seriously.
Hmm.
I can't tell you the number of times
Hmm.
in my early 20s where I'd say like, "Oh, I'm going to this writing conference," or and people would be like, "Oh, you're still at it. Love that you still have that hobby." Is always sort of treated as something I did on the side. Yes. And I had to push through that and say, it's actually not a hobby. Like I think this is what I, in some ways, was put on this earth to do.
Hmm.
Um, and through that, to protect your time for writing and protect your time for reading, and not be pulled by all of the many demands and obligations that we have on our time to sacrifice that really sacred time.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I'd say is to find community. I mentioned working at Grub Street in my early 20s, which was such a gift. And I think part of that was because writing, like so many art forms, it's, I guess instead of if you're playing in an orchestra, it's not quite as solitary, but like many art
Hmm.
forms, it's a very solitary practice.
Hmm.
And there are times when you very much feel lost in the wilderness of your own making. So
Hmm.
being able to turn to people who are in the same struggle and to get their feedback and to get their understanding and empathy has been so important, for my own sanity. And I think also, having writers who are at later stages of their career to give you an idea of what comes next,
Hmm.
writers who are now at earlier stages of their career where I can tell them like, okay, this is what you do when you have a call with an editor, and sort of pay
Hmm.
it forward in that way. I think that that's what's made this writing life so rich for me is
Hmm.
really the other people in it.
Hmm.
So yeah, those are, and also get comfortable with rejection, just because it's going to come for us all. I mean, gosh, if I
Uh-huh.
could count the number of rejections I've received in my life, it's impossible.
I want to say that the author who it's and I'm going to forget her full name, but the woman whose novel Yesteryear just got
Oh
published.
yes,
Yep.
yes.
Um,
Carol Claire Burke. Yep.
yeah, printed or put a sort of a story on Instagram that was, or maybe it was a deck that was just screenshots of her submittable, right? Like decline, 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 and like
Yes.
snapshots from her rejection letters. Like, I'm going to pass on this one. This isn't quite right for us. And just like a decade of them. And so
Oh,
that's, and now she's got this
I'll
book
have
out. So,
them. Yes.
yep.
Yeah. And
So,
now to reach it.
yeah. All right. Well, it is 7:45, and so this is the appointed time for me to say, does anyone have a question that they would like to ask? And I know that there is at least one question literally in the house. If anyone would like to ask it, I have to figure out how to get everybody back on screen here. One moment. I'm out of the Zoom teaching habit, so And I don't remember pinning people. Okay, now I can see everyone whose video is on. Does anyone have a question you would like to ask? And yeah, Wendy, do you want to ask? Do you want to unmute and ask it? I think we're a small enough group that we could do that if you want.
There, can you hear me?
Yeah, totally.
Um, Thank you, Rowan. This has been great. It's really, I enjoyed the book. I have read the book. I was just curious, did you ever meet any of the women who were in these camps?
Oh, I have not. And sadly, just because of the time period at which these ranches exist, a lot of them are no longer with us.
Mm.
So as part of my research, I stumbled across this pretty incredible resource called the Reno Divorce History Project, which was created by the University of Nevada. Um, and it's this amazing collection of articles that were written at the time about the divorce trade and photographs. Um, and they also had really incredible transcripts of interviews with some of the women that traveled to Reno from that time period, because they made it a point, I think in the early 90s, to track some of them down and talk to them about their experiences. So even though I didn't get to talk to them directly, I felt like I was in conversation with them in my own way. And part of the joy of, going on book tour and joining book clubs, is that I've heard from some people who came up to me and would say, my mom actually traveled to Reno at that time period. And it's a time that I never thought that much about, but now I'm thinking really deeply about what that period must have been like for her, or my grandmother went, or my aunt went. So it's been really interesting to hear from people that sort of have those secondhand experiences, and what reading this book has brought to light for them.
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
Amazing. We've two questions that have come in from the audience. One is from Kelly Lynn, class of 93. Kelly, I saw you. Hello. Who wants to hear about your creative process, Rowan? What are your non-negotiables? Are there any with a 3-year-old?
Yes. Gosh, my creative process. So I am somebody, I'm very lucky. I work at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. I'm based in Chicago, but I work 4 days a week. So I have Wednesday as sort of my protected writing day. I don't believe any human can actually write for 8 hours a day. That's impossible. But my mornings are really sacred to me. So I always have Wednesday mornings where I'm able to write for, around 3 or 4 hours. And then I write in the mornings before my daughter wakes up. I think I am lucky in that I can write on the train. I can write in busy coffee shops. I think, frankly, through necessity, I've developed this ability. And so, I'm not one of those writers, not to disparage these people, I'm not one of those writers who waits for inspiration. I know that I have a very set period of time in which I am able to do this, and that I have to get words on the page during that time period. And that was not the case when I was younger. It was definitely not the case when I was in my 20s. But being a working professional, being a mother, but being somebody who just has friends and who wants to be out in the world, I've found that having those really discrete periods of time is actually really helpful and helps me be less precious about those first drafts, which I think has helped my writing in the long run.
One of the things when we do the Exeter program, one of the places we go is Jane Austen's house in the southeast in England. And one of the things that's fascinating, and if I could do it fast enough, if I'd thought of this before just now, I would have had it ready. I wish I could share my screen and show you an image. But she has this kind of octagonal little table. Like it's really not a lot. It's probably not even twice the size of my MacBook screen, right? And a little chair, and she's sitting just on the edge of the dining room by the window. And so thinking about, the Virginia Woolf's idea about a room of one's own, and the importance of having a room of your own and having time of your own and money of your own to be able to create, and then seeing Jane Austen's small table and small chair there, at the window where she can see people come and go, but also where she's in the flow of the life of her house is kind of amazing. So
Oh my
it's
gosh,
worth
I can't imagine.
Googling Jane Austen's writing
Yes.
desk and just take a look at what it, because it's different than you would imagine. Or,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, and
Oh, that's
I always
amazing.
thought of it as, so she's sitting there because she has to, and then she's hiding her work. But I think it also makes sense that she's just sitting there because that's where the life is. And she's
Yes.
putting her
Yeah.
work away because like you go back to the life. Like you don't leave your stuff just lying around to accidentally go
Exactly.
into the fire or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
Um,
God forbid. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So I have a couple more questions that have come in. One is from Elizabeth Lemire, and I'm going to say Elizabeth. I'm afraid I'm going to say your name. Is it Lemire or Lemire? Elizabeth from the class of 21 wants to hear about the development of Mr. Tarleton, the lawyer.
Oh. Oh, Mr.
Wear your
Tarleton.
red dress to court. And she's like, I don't have a red dress. Yeah. So,
Yes. Unfortunately, there is some real life inspiration for
okay.
the character of Mr. Tarleton. So so some other texts that I read as inspiration were actually like memoirs of women that had
Mm,
traveled to Reno. And also the memoirs, which I highly recommend if anybody's interested in this time period, of
mm,
ranch hand from one of the most famous
mm,
one of those famous ranches from that time period called the Flying and Me.
mm,
And he worked there in the early 1950s. His book is called The Divorce Seekers. His name
mm,
is William McGee. He's sadly no longer with us. But they would describe the lawyers in these memoirs, and unfortunately, they were often pretty lecherous individuals.
mm, mm,
um, and many of them would pursue affairs with the women that came into their office. Some women entered those affairs very willingly. Um,
mm.
and so when I thought about the character of Mr. Tarleton, unfortunately, I just had um, a lot of, unseemly lawyers. I hate to give into the cliche of
Mm.
of that portrayal of lawyers sometimes, but it really did make sense for the story, and for these men who were in many ways offering women this freedom to also be
Mm,
taking advantage of them in their own way.
mm,
I
mm,
think unfortunately that was pretty common.
mm.
Yeah, God, I haven't thought about Mr. Tarleton in a
Uh-huh.
long time.
Um, Here's another specific question. I'm going to jump to Hillary Harding's question. Without giving up information about the monogram on Greer's clothes, I wonder if it was deliberate that Greer and Lois had reverse initials, GL and LG.
Man, I love when people pick up on these little Easter eggs.
Huh?
I should have known that a Kenyon crowd would be able to do that sort of really careful analysis. But yes, that was
Mm,
intentional. And thank you so much for doing such a close read of it.
mm, mm,
Yes, I think because I took such time with each chapter and such time with the novel, in general, I was able to sort of put those little clues throughout the book.
mm, mm,
So I think
mm.
that is representative of sort of the ways that those two women are bonded and mirrors in their own way.
Right on. Okay. Um, Here's a one more question that's focused on, maybe we'll have two more questions really focused on the book and then one more broad question about
Yeah.
writing and publication. So one more question is from Phoebe Brown. The book touches on how Lois's mother's life and death had an impact on her. Did you
Mm.
consider spending more of the novel on that impact?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, the mother relationship is one that I really had to refine
Mm,
over drafts of the book. And in the initial draft, it actually had a much larger footprint, I would
mm,
say. It's funny, I remember at some point thinking that the book hadn't changed that much from its initial draft, and then I went
mm,
and opened an old file, and I was like, oh my God, this novel is unrecognizable to me.
uh, uh,
So it changed a lot, partially through this relationship, and also originally there was just a lot more women on the ranch. I
uh,
think because I had so many points of inspiration from my research and those
mm,
transcripts that I wanted to capture a lot of real life women at,
mhm,
at the Golden Yarrow. And then, frankly, I got a lot of very helpful feedback, which was that nobody can keep track of this enormous cast of characters. And I think through that feedback, um, it made me think really deeply about the central relationship to this book, which is the relationship between Lois and Greer. And so there were things about Lois's relationship with her mother that I thought were very helpful to explore, because they inform her relationship with Greer and how she approaches that sort of attachment and connection. But I did have to do some editing just so that relationship remained central, and that the relationship with the mother didn't dominate the novel and Lois's sort of emotional reality. So yes, there's a version in which that plays a much bigger part. I think eventually that I got to sort of the right footprint for that relationship, but it was something I went back and forth on a lot.
Well, I think one of the tools you use to make that relationship vivid is actually something that I know Sergey had a question about. And so I'm going to just have the pleasure of calling on Sergey. Sergey, will you unmute yourself and ask Rowan your question?
Hey, Rowan, how are you? So
It's so
great,
good to see you.
so great to see you and to read your book. It's so fabulous. And actually, my question, really, in a way, we've sort of touched on already, and it's about the movies and the way in which it feels like Lois is her most authentic self in a way in response to these movies, and that this is part of a bond with her mother. Yes.
Yes, very much.
There was a moment when I was, on my way through the book, and I came across. I guess she goes to strangers on a train, and I suddenly felt like Hitchcock had just entered the picture and was defining. So I wonder if you would talk a little bit more about the way in which movies structure not just the novel but also Lois's sense of self.
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. Because movies are so central to understanding Lois as a character. And I think they're very much, especially when she's a young woman and going to these films with her mother, like they're her window to the larger world, and they show her what's possible, and open doors for her, even before she meets Greer. And so I very much wanted to communicate through that obsession with film, what those movies do for Lois, and the sort of sense of freedom and possibility they give her, but also the negative aspects to that, and the fact that they very much give her an understanding of the world which the world can never meet. And so this false sense of people just as heroes or as villains. And I think that that's very much something that I tried to explore through the character of Greer, is that someone can first appear like a savior, and then they can ultimately be a force of destruction in your own life. And I think that something that was done almost unconsciously through sort of that obsession with film is, when I would read a draft of the novel, I realized that I was writing scenes in a cinematic sense, where I was very much conscious of the imagery and the sensory details. And I found that often, as I was reading my own work, I was like, I'm kind of scanning the room almost like a director would scan the room, or a camera lens, I should say, would scan the room. And I tried to, include some sort of winking details. Patricia Highsmith was a huge point of inspiration for this book, and so I had to find a moment to directly reference her. So I think I also, throughout the book, try to mention films that are important to Lois or that she's experiencing, to kind of touch on larger themes of the book. But yeah, film is so central to the novel. Thanks for asking.
I hope that this is okay. I'm going to ask the last question we have here, and please feel free to take this as briefly or as longly as you want to. Longly, how's that? So can you talk a bit more, this is from Sarah Texar, can you talk a bit more about your path to publication and how long it took to find your literary agent? And this will be our last question for the night.
Oh, yeah. So I got very lucky. I always feel kind of guilty about this with my literary agent story, and that I mentioned that I primarily wrote short fiction for a long time period, and I won this literary fiction award, and I got an agent through a short story, actually. So when I had the divorcees, I had an agent, which was great. Made that process a lot easier. but my agent, and they're actually agents, I have co-agents. We went through many rounds of revision on this novel. It was definitely not a situation where I handed it to them and I said, done. And they said, great, send it off to the editors. You know, they were like, we have a lot of notes. So we went through many rounds of revision. And during this time period, I was pregnant with my daughter. And we were getting really down to the wire. And I was like, we need to finish. I have a deadline I'd love to share with you. So we actually sent the manuscript out to editors the day after I gave birth to my daughter, which I highly recommend. It because I think that, you know, that time period when your manuscript is out with editors and at any moment you could get this call that's going to change your life. Of course, you're just obsessively refreshing your email and looking at your cell phone. But I couldn't do any of that because I was, you know, trying to figure out how to keep a newborn child alive. So it was kind of fortuitous in that way. And then about a month after it went out, I got a text from my agents that said, Carolyn Bleaky of Flatiron is interested. And so I, you know, showered and put on makeup for the first time in a month and had a lovely conversation with her, and sort of immediately knew that she was the right person for the book. So yeah, it's kind of an unusual path to publication, but that's how it happened.
I love that interweaving also of your domestic and family life and your writing life. It feels very, very on point with everything that you've said tonight. So
Yes.
Congratulations on all of that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And I thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thanks to everybody who's here for joining us. And thanks, Rowan, for all of your engaging and inspiring remarks. I feel like I learned so much about writing and about, and so much more. I'm going to have to read your book a third time now in light of this conversation. I hope everybody here has enjoyed the program as much as I have and as much as I hope Rowan has. Before we leave tonight, I am delighted to share with you that Kenyon's going to be hosting a women's conference this October, October 23rd to 25th, 2026, here on campus. So please save the date for what promises to be an exciting and meaningful gathering celebrating Kenyon women like Rowan who are doing extraordinary work. On behalf of the Kenyon Women Giving Back group and the book club, thanks for spending your evening with us tonight. Have a wonderful night, everybody. And if you're back on the Hill at any point, please let us know. All right. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
Right.
Really appreciate it.
Good night.